Ghost in the Machine by Patrick Carman, Wednesday, September 22nd, 5:05 p.m. Sarah's going to email me in a few hours, but right now I'm sitting on the front porch trying to play it cool. The old couch is getting some holes, but it's the most comfortable place to rest outside my own room. I hope my mom doesn't move it to the yard, try to sell it. Dad and Henry are still at the creek fishing, which doesn't surprise me. Some of the best bugs come out in the late afternoon and early evening. They might not be back until 7 or 8, especially if they're trying to avoid another dinner like last night. I've had the house to myself all afternoon, and Mom won't be home for another hour. I brought my laptop downstairs at 3, and for the past 2 hours I've been digging around. 3 cans of Coke later, I've found some amazing stuff. I've decided that I'm obsessed with Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, and Sir Isaac Newton. As far as I'm concerned, these guys were rock stars. I can see how a secret society would be interested in them. Who doesn't love a mad scientist? But after the research I did today, I think I'm starting to see a bigger reason why the members of the Crossbones have been interested in Boyle, Hooke, and Newton. A brief history of these 3 people is worth writing down. First, Hooke, Robert Hooke. Many historians believe Hooke was the first person to use the word cell in relation to biology. That alone makes him larger than life. Imagine being the first person to use the word pizza, or football, or movie. Those are nothing compared to the word for the building block of all life as we know it, including pizza, footballs, and movies. Impressive. Robert Hooke did all these experiments with air pumps and springs and elastic, a bunch of really great stuff. A lot of people give Hooke credit for inventing the balance spring, which is what makes small timepieces possible. He theorized correctly about combustion decades before anyone else understood it, which understood it. He invented barometers, optical devices, microscopes, and universal joints. Hooke was one of the first people to accurately measure weather, to see objects too tiny for the naked eye, and survey huge parts of London so that it could be rebuilt after the Great Fire of 1666. He also figured out some very important stuff about elasticity, but I have to admit I don't really understand it. So one of Sir Isaac Newton's most famous lines was actually in a letter he wrote to Robert Hooke. If I had seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. So that's what Sir Isaac Newton, the discoverer of gravity, thought of Hooke. Not bad. Sir Isaac Newton is even more important than I realized. Sure, I knew he was impressive, but I could have spent all day researching the things he invented and discovered, and not even scratched the surface. From gravity to planetary movements, from calculus to how light works, Newton was at the forefront of so many groundbreaking discoveries. It's no wonder he's known as the father of science. And then there was the last of the 3, Robert Boyle, who turns out to be the most interesting. Let's start with his hair. The guy had guts to go out on the streets of London looking like that. Wow, plenty of wigs to choose from at the wig shop, and he chose the biggest of the bunch. Robert Boyle was a scientist with devout religious beliefs. After reading up on him, I think this was one of the key things that made Boyle unique. It's not that other notable scientists of his time had no faith, it's just that Boyle was a Christian first and a scientist second. The fact that he was highly successful at both made him a powerful figure of the times. He admired God's workmanship and saw the study of natural science as a form of worship. The only way, in his view, to discover the world God made was to investigate it. This seems like a sound idea to me. As far as I can tell, he was a little bit of a nutty professor. Just about everything Boyle ever wrote was short on organization and long on ideas. I imagine if he'd had a car, the keys would have gone missing all the time. He was constantly refuting the ideas of other chemists and scientists, and although he was often right, this might have had the effect of making him seem like a know-it-all to some. He was outrageously wealthy, primarily because his father was one of the richest men in Ireland. His title, I'm not making this up, was the great Earl of Cork. But I don't think he made corks, or pluggers, or bottle caps. He lived in Cork, which I guess is a place in Ireland. Anyway, this meant Boyle could afford to hire assistants, including Robert Hooke. Yes, that Robert Hooke, to work for him. It was Boyle's idea to explore gases and pumps, but Hooke did many of the hands-on experiments. Many people regard Robert Boyle as the most important chemist of his time, which makes the fact that he was an alchemist all the more interesting. You heard me right. Robert Boyle, the Robert Boyle, was a closet alchemist, and not just a hobby alchemist. He was fairly obsessed with it. Apparently, Sir Isaac Newton also thought a lot about alchemy, but it was Boyle who appears to have been at the forefront of this very subjective science. And while it's hard to find references to Robert Hooke and alchemy, something tells me all 3 of them were secretly working in this area together. Alchemy, I'm starting to learn, was then and continues to be today a controversial offshoot of real chemistry. During Boyle's time, it was viewed as voodoo chemistry, where chemicals and metals were brought together in strange ways to accomplish outlandish things. It was not serious science. And here we come to the most interesting thing of all, the thing that makes the appearance of their names in the crossbones make all the sense in the world. Robert Boyle wrote a secret paper that didn't surface until long after his death. It was never meant to be published, but it was. This is what the paper was called: An Historical Account of a Degradation of Gold Made by an Anti-Elixir. If you believe the secret paper by Boyle, he was very close to figuring something out, something remarkable and kind of scary for what it could mean. Robert Boyle was very close to finding a way to turn gold into something else. Imagine if you could change the properties of gold so it wasn't gold anymore, and then changed it back again. Imagine, what if you worked on a gold dredge and had a way to hide gold or change gold, then change it back? It can't be possible, can it? Could Boyle and Hooke and Newton have secretly figured this out, but told no one? What if the secret is out there and someone from my own little town figured it out? A process like that sure would come in handy on a gold dredge. It might start to answer why so many members of the Crossbones ended up dead, and why at least one of the dead doesn't want to leave the dredge. Wednesday, September 22nd, 9:05 p.m. I'm stuck in my room where I just watched the last tiny speck of light from the sun disappear. Summer is fading fast. It used to stay light until almost 10 out here. Not anymore. Mom came home at 6 and made me dinner. It wasn't as bad as I expected it to be, but then again, it's hard to mess up when you're making spaghetti and the sauce is out of a jar. We sat together at the kitchen table and waited for Dad and Henry to come home. They're not coming back for dinner, are they? Mom asked me. She was twirling a fork full of pasta. I wouldn't count on it. Without Henry around, it was quieter. I'm beginning to think I prefer quiet. It's a lot of work holding up my end of the conversation. Mom and I mostly sat in silence, which was okay. We talked about what I'd done all day, and I told her I spent most of it at the cafe writing and drawing. That sounds nice. It felt good to be out of the house, I said. I think I'm ready to get back to school. This town is awfully dull during the day with no one around. Mom smiled. I was glad to make her think I wanted to go back to school like a normal kid, even if I wasn't too sure about it myself. There's going to be a lot of questions about the accident and what I've been doing. I could live without all that attention. Dad and Henry finally stumbled in around 8, arguing about who caught the bigger fish and smelling like two guys who hadn't taken a shower in about a month. "We're starved. What's cooking?" asked Henry. "Whatever was cooking is gone," Mom replied. "You're on your own." Henry and my dad looked at each other, shrugged their shoulders, and went straight for the Bisquick. "What is it with you two and pancakes?" asked my mom. They didn't answer. Two old friends in the kitchen making the easiest of all foods. I envied them their time together like never before. "I was out a lot today, and I'm tired," I said. I didn't mean for it to sound like I was irritated, especially with Henry leaving and all, but I think it was obvious. I saw them as a little club no one else was invited into. "You sure you don't want a cake or two?" Henry said. "I could tell you about how I caught 10 times more fish than your dad did." "I thought you had to go visit Gerald down the road," Dad said. Henry nodded, but then said, "Gerald can wait a while. He'll be up late. Always is." Gerald is another old friend of Henry's. He lives in the next town over, a town that had the distinction of having been the very last place in America to get phone service. It's even more of a dead end than Skeleton Creek. Gerald is quite a bit older and can't go fishing anymore, but Henry always visits him at least once on every trip from New York. The fishing has been so good for 2 weeks, he'd put it off until the last minute. Henry did a little more begging, and Dad nodded like he wanted to spend some time with me, so I sat with them on the porch for almost an hour, acting more and more tired as the minutes passed, until Henry jumped out of his chair so he could drive the 10 miles down to Gerald's place. I was sure my mom used the time I was on the porch to check on my computer and my phone. At least I could turn in early, and they would not have any reason to bother me. I came up here a little while ago, right before the sun started setting, and right at 9 o'clock I checked my email. Nothing. I checked again at 9:01. There it was, a note from Sarah. It was cool to think she was sitting at her computer and me at mine, and somewhere in those magical 60 seconds we had made a connection. She clicked send. I refreshed my screen, and there was the note. It was sort of like magic, and I missed her more than ever. "I'm glad you stayed at the cafe. Who knows what would have happened right under our nose if not for you. This is it, Ryan. Something really big is happening tonight, and we're going to see it. I'm sure I can get into the Watts place while the meeting is going on. My parents, believe it or not, are out on a date. They should be back in about a half hour. I'll see them when they come home so they think everything is normal. If all goes well, they'll be asleep by 11. I'll go straight to Longhorns, then to Dr. Watts's house. Watts has to be hiding something, and this is our best chance to find out what. He can't be two places at once, so we'll know he'll be out of his house. I just hope I can get inside. The tape and the camera at Longhorns Grange will run for about 90 minutes. Hopefully that will be long enough to catch the entire meeting. I'll start it as close to midnight as possible. Okay, best part of all, I'll broadcast everything live for you. I can't go live with the Crossbones meeting, but I can use my other camera, the one we use to broadcast live in the Dredge, to send you a feed. Go to the site at 11:30 p.m. if you can. That's when I'll start broadcasting off and on. Just be sure no one else is watching. To get into the feed, go to my site and use the password Mary Shelley. Scared but excited. This is going to be incredible. Sarah. I'm scared for her. I mean, really scared. I'm not sure we should do this.